Hello, hello, dear listeners. I have a question for you. What do you see out of your windows right now? For me, when I look outside, I see transition. There are patches of snow, particularly in the shady parts of our land. And at the same time, there are these first signs of new growth. Daffodils and crocuses just beginning to show themselves. The ground is now warm enough that though the snow may come, and it probably will, we can trust now that it won't last long. So, in my corner of the world, we are on the cusp of mud season. And I am curious for you to think about what is it that you're on the cusp for? Whatever shape this time takes in your backyard, we are together entering into a new season. It is, dear friends, spring. This year, and as this episode is dropping, we will have just ushered in spring and the vernal equinox. And poetically, this year, spring announced itself just as a new moon was showing herself in the sky. So it really is a time that feels like all around us, nature invites us to set our intentions for what we want to grow. And so today we talk about planting seeds. And it's with intention that I bring this week's episode forward as a contrast to the approach shared in last week's episode on vision to action, where we talked about the full cycle of holding the big picture and then being able to funnel our focus down to day-to-day actions. To design yourself means to set a vision, lead with intention, and act on purpose. As an executive coach, team accelerator, and vision guide, I am always looking for the most ease-filled pathway in to being able to do this for my clients, for myself. And sometimes holding the full picture and dropping down into action, right? Vision to action is just what's needed. And other times it's too much in the moment and we have to get really focused. And that's what we do when we plant seeds. It's not about all the big picture and the harvest in the garden. It's about hold that one tiny seed in your hand, sometimes a speck of a thing that you might not even know what it is. Is it dust? Is it a seed? Right? Really small, brings our attention really focused. And so in today's episode, as we talk about planting seeds, I'm going to talk about 4 small actions to take when planting seeds. And that's what we're going to do. That's our movement for today. So here are just broad strokes headlines. Here are the 4 actions that we're going to work our way through. Then I will go through each one, give a little more detail, and that'll be where we go. So here they are. So 4 actions to take when planting seeds. And yes, you will see how this applies to physical seeds in a garden. But of course, here we're talking about the gardens of your lives, your work, your teams, your businesses, your organizations. So we'll draw the metaphor together back into the shape of our day-to-day lives. Okay, so you're going to prepare the quote unquote soil. You're going to choose what to grow. Then you're going to nourish those seeds. And finally, you're going to trust that your seeds will grow. And we're going to lean on a children's story to remind us of how to do that. Okay, so first, prepare the quote unquote soil. So, of course, when we think about, and I think this is a time where it's useful to think about physical gardens in the ground, that dirt. And then we're going to draw the connection to. So, what's the dirt of our work lives? What's the dirt of our home lives, for example? When you prepare soil in a garden, there's really three simple questions to ask. What is the current state of the soil? Is it sandy? Is it clay? Is it loamy? Like, what's the quality of the soil? What's the current state? Next, what debris needs to be removed? Are there the stems of plants left to overwinter? Are there weeds that have popped up? Are there, I think of an early garden of mine in Washington, D.C. Are there bottles and discarded litter from neighbors nearby that's been left in the yard, right? What debris needs to be removed? And finally, what nutrients need to be added in? Again, with the soil of our gardens, that clay soil needs compost to be able to add nutrients back in, to loosen up the density of the clay. What do you need to add in to make sure that the soil is ready to let things grow? Now, let's think about this not as the dirt underneath our fingernails, but in the constructs of our work and lives. So, there, the soil might be making sure that the team in your work setting has the culture and the relationships that they can communicate effectively, right? What are the things that are going to allow your team to grow? In your home life, it might be understanding, well, what's the current state of our schedule? Is it overcrowded? Is it free and open? Right? So think about the conditions that allow you to grow in your home, with your family, with your colleagues, in your business, right? That's what is the soil? What is the space, the conditions that allow for growth? And then it's the same questions. What is the current state? Is the current state something that allows for growth? Or is the current state something that feels stagnant, stale, littered, cluttered, right? What is the current state of your quote unquote soil? That's just cozying up to what's real and true right now. Then from there, what are you going to take away and what are you going to add in to allow for conditions to growth to be there? What debris needs to be removed? Are there bad habits? Are there missing supports? Get rid of them. Get rid of the things that are cluttering and add in the nutrients that will support. So, for example, if you tend to have team meetings that are highly ineffective, by which I mean you have, for example, you might have circular conversations where you never seem to progress forward to where you want to go. Okay, notice that without judgment. And now remove the habits and patterns of having those kinds of circular conversations. Remove the belief that you can't do it any other way because that's the way you always do it. And maybe the nutrients you're adding in are things like having a clear agenda, having an owner of moving through the agenda, talking as a team about mutual accountability for holding each other accountable to having that conversation, right? Add those nutrients in. Asking yourself at the end of every meeting, what have we decided? What outcome did we get to? And does that align with where we wanted to go on our agenda? And notice it without judgment. Nutrients added in, it's habits, it's discipline, it's focus, it's attention. What nutrients are you adding in? In your life, that might be, okay, well, the current state of my soil is that in key areas of my home, there, uh, there's kind of stuckness. it feels stale. I'm thinking of my own mudroom where the ski season's not totally done yet, uh, but the skis are we're almost there, and the skis are leaning up against the closet, and it's hard to get into that one closet, and we have an idea about where they could be stored, but we haven't stored them there. And this is the main thoroughfare in and out of the house. There's also cardboard boxes that we've been saving to be able to use to build new garden beds. Those are those are there. So the current state is, in some parts of, and this is of our home life, in some parts of our home life, there's these spaces that just feel like the energy is stale. So what debris needs to be removed? Well, I'm not getting rid of the skis, but I want to get rid of them where they are. So how do I move things around, turn up the soil? And in that process, what are things that are in places that can go? And I can think of what those things can be. So remove that debris. What nutrients need to be added in? New habits around once we remove the debris and we create conditions for where things go, it's about building a discipline around doing it differently and having mutual accountability. Notice that theme to, to make sure that we do those things, starting with yourself, starting in this instance with myself, modeling my coat gets hung up, modeling the shoes go in in this specific spot, modeling my keys go in this spot. It's very modeling that when you forget to do those things, you bring grace and come back to the discipline of what you've said you want to do. So what nutrients need to be added in? In some, you begin by preparing the soil. Now, arguably, you can get to this next thing I'm going to talk about first, and you don't have to. So this is where back to finding these micro actions, even if you don't know what you want to grow yet. Sometimes preparing the soil and seeing the blank slate helps you feel the potential that then you can shift into choosing what to grow, which is the second bucket we're going to talk about. And if you are like, I have been in a dreaming, I am choosing what to grow, or I know what I'm calling in and I want to clarify that, and then look at how I'm preparing the soil, can you flip flop these? Of course you can. I am a magnanimous podcasting host. You can choose your own adventure. And when in doubt, I would say prepare the soil first and then choose what to grow. When you choose what to grow in the whole of your life, again, I want to borrow from physical gardens, dirt underneath the fingernails. And I want to talk to you about 4 different types of things that you can grow. And then we're going to draw the parallel into our work and lives. So perennials are plants that come back again and again. And, over time they may get exhausted and not come back. Or it may be something that comes back typically every other year in a different way, right? Those are getting into deeper distinctions. But the headline here is you can plant something that you know will return. And that's important when you think about in the whole of your lives, because these are things you don't have to think about because it's going to come back, which can save you some energy. Because if you really want that thing to be there, it will return again and again and again. And if you don't want those things, you have to actually remove them and change them. So, an example of this in our work and home lives might be traditions. What are the traditions that you celebrate year in, year out? It might be here's how we celebrate birthdays or anniversaries or other milestones. It might be these are traditions for how we celebrate the holidays. It might be traditions for how we celebrate new business coming into our work life. Like, what are those traditions, those things that happen again and again, and you don't think about it? And the light of these is they're going to come back and you don't have to reinvent. This is what we do every 4th of July. And if you are finding back to preparing the soil that you need new space in a certain bed, a certain part of your calendar year, then you might need to shift the perennials around or gift them elsewhere or compost them and say they this has given me what we need, and we're going to let it go and say it's done just what we need it to do. Those are perennials. Second type of distinction are thinking about trees and shrubs. What are trees and shrubs in the gardens of our physical spaces? They're the big things that take up space. And so when we think about our work, our teams, our lives, our homes, what are the big things that we are placing there? And that might be things like the partner that you choose to be with. It might be things like, do I want to have children or not? It might be job. It might be, do I want a side hustle? It might be, I'm committing to a certain exercise routine or habit stacking, right? These are the big things that are filling in core parts of my life. What are the trees and shrubs? These tend to be costlier to bring in, right? If we think of physical trees. And you can also get them as sticks, very small, but they will grow to be big. Is sometimes left unattended if put in a place they'll thrive. Um, they can take a long time to grow. They can be a fast growing variety. So, what I want you to think about when you're choosing what to grow around trees and shrubs, and back to preparing the soil, like how are the big spaces of my work and life filling in? And am I wanting any bigger shifts? We need to get rid of some of the shade and make more light. There's a certain kind of big thing that I'm missing and I want to plant it. Okay, choose what to grow. Is this a season where you're building out big things, where you're bringing in perennials? Third type of distinction around choosing what to grow is annuals. Annuals are going to come in this season and then they're going to die back. They're unlikely to return. Some annuals have a tendency to reseed themselves, so you might want to be aware of that. Or you think you can make that intuitive leap in your work and life. What are those things that's here for a season, but then suddenly it almost seems like it's become a perennial, like it keeps coming back, even though we only meant to bring it in for this season. And I think this is the former sales and marketing executive in me. I think of campaigns. So you might do an experimental campaign, and then is the expectation you're going to do that campaign again and again and again? Did I did I unknowingly say yes to that, even though I thought it was a seasonal and annual thing that I had brought in? So think about, in this season, what are the annual things that you want to call in that you're not expecting to come back, but that bring a certain gift to your work and your life. And I often think these gifts can be things about beauty. When we're bringing in annuals, it can be something that fills in a gap and you want to bring something into that space. It can be that you're bringing in an annual because it's going to replenish the soil for future years. What do you want to bring in this season that you don't need to come back? Those are the annuals. You choose what to grow. Finally, I wanted to talk about edibles, so plants that you can eat. And in this sense of in your work and life, I want you to think about what are the things you want to plant that are going to feed you. So it's not just about building the structures and the supports around you, but it's going to actually nourish you. In our gardens, those are going to be things like lettuces and kale and herbs and tomatoes and zucchini and all kinds of vegetables and fruits. All right. Those are all kinds of things that we can plant that we can eat. And of course, there are perennial edibles, there are annual edibles. So those things intersect. In our lives, we might think about what are the nutrients, what are the things we need to input into us, not surround ourselves with. So I think here about, yes, physically, what do we want to eat? And also spiritually, what will nourish us? what will nourish our spirits? What are the edibles? What are those things that you want to plant that will nourish you this season? So, headline here, you're going to choose what to grow. And I want you to have these distinctions of what are the perennial things that I want to put into the garden of my life in this season? What about trees and shrubs? Are there any bigger things that I need to call in, that I'm choosing to call in? Or back to preparing the soil that I want to remove? Where am I filling in the gaps with annuals, things that will be here and die back? And then finally, what about the things that will nourish me? Are there any edible plants that I want to call in this season? Third thing that you're going to do is nourish those seeds. Every seed, and this is one of the things that, again, dirt under my fingernails, as I've gotten more and more into gardening and planted more and more things from seed, which for me really is just in the last few years, aligned with the pandemic, where I remember planting my first pea plant, and I thought, oh my gosh, a pea seed looks like a pea that I would get from the grocery store. Like, shocking. And so you begin to see how every seed takes on a different shape. And inside every seed is a kind of hope. Like, you look at that one thing and there is a plant that can emerge from that. It's incredible. So when you think about nourishing those seeds, I do think there is that component of love and hope and inspiration that you can hold for what's possible in that seed. So that's that spirit nourishment. Same thing we're wanting from any edible plants that we're bringing in to grow. And there's a physiological: sun, water, food, rest. We want to nourish our seeds. What is the light that your plants, quote unquote, will need? How will you make sure that it stays hydrated? What nutrients need to be added in? And how do you not overwhelm it? Try and grow it too fast. Let it rest. Let it take its time. Nourish those seeds. I'm imagining you can draw those parallels, right? What are the spirit needs? What are the physiological needs that are going to allow those things that I'm choosing to grow to flourish and thrive in a sustainable way for the thing I'm growing, for me, for the team or family that I'm a part of, the community I'm a part of, and for the planet, that it's sustainable all the way around. Nourish those seeds. Finally, trust that your seeds will grow. And this is where it's not just there's that, it's hope in my hand, it's hope that I'm pushing into the ground, but also it's trust that I'm instilling in myself that when I've pushed that seed into the figurative ground, that something will emerge, even when all I see is brown, 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 everywhere brown, says the woman who sees mud season coming. So there's a period of time when we're growing things where you don't see anything. And so I wanted to lean on a favorite story. It's a favorite story. If I had no children, I assure you I would still love children's stories. I've enjoyed them throughout the whole of my life. And it is a delight to share them with my children. But I wanted to lean on Frog and Toad. If you know, you know. And there's a story in the Frog and Toad series called The Garden. And Frog, who tends to be between the frog and toad dynamic, a little more steady as the frog goes, whereas Toad can get more anxious. They both have their moments. But they're dear, dear friends. And headline of this story is Toad sees Frog's garden and is like, I want one too. And Frog says, great, here are some seeds, go plant them. Now, in this episode, I'm telling you, you will choose your seeds. sometimes you might take the seeds that other people give you. You might be in a season where that's what you're choosing to grow is something that someone else sees for you in an intentional way. So it's not being put on you, but you're choosing it. In this case, Toad takes the seeds, and then here I'm gonna read you some of this. Uh, he planted the flower seeds, and then he says, "Now seeds," said Toad, "start growing." Toad walked up and down a few times. The seeds did not start to grow. Friends, Toad is not trusting the seeds. Okay. He's looking at these rows. It's a there's kind of a grass, probably a perennial grass growing up behind him, but he's looking at the brown ground and nothing's there. So Toad put his head close to the ground and said loudly, "Now seeds start growing." Toad looked at the ground again. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head very close to the ground and shouted, "Now seeds start growing." Frog came running up to the path. "What is all this noise?" he asked. "My seeds will not grow," said Toad. "You are shouting too much," said Frog. "These poor seeds are afraid to grow." "My seeds are afraid to grow?" asked Toad. "Of course," said Frog. "Leave them alone for a few days. Let the sun shine on them. Let the rain fall on them. Soon your seeds will start to grow." Now, dear listeners, I believe if you plant your seeds, soon your seeds too will start to grow. And there are many different ways that you can nourish them. And you can read the rest of the garden and see some of the funny things that Toad did. And you can sit in your own intuitive wisdom of what will your seeds need to grow. And that's trusting them and trusting your intuition as you listen to what your seeds need. And that, dear listeners, is what I wanted to share with you all today. Thank you as ever for showing up, for listening. If you love today's episode, if you would like to do something to support the podcast, here are 3 simple things that you can do. You can subscribe to the podcast. That means you will make sure you get every episode, and it helps others connect to the podcast too. You can rate and review the podcast. Believe me, I read every single one of them. So thank you to those who are leaving them. And 3, you can tell a friend or a colleague who you think this will help. So perhaps as you think about what you're learning around planting seeds, look to your community, to your network, and who else do you think might benefit, who you might want to share what you learned, who you might want to prompt into a similar kind of learning in their own way. So share this episode, this podcast with a friend or colleague. And finally, no action needed here for you unless you are feeling like, you know what, it's time for myself or a colleague executive coaching, perhaps a team facilitation. Maybe there's visioning support you're wanting to call in. If you are looking for that, be in touch with me directly. You can contact me over at pointroadstudios.com on the contact page or via LinkedIn, Instagram, either with my name or Point Road Studios. And that, beautiful listeners, is all I wanted to share. I am wishing you a gorgeous rest of your week. And until next Wednesday, remember, there is nothing stopping you. So go on ahead and get after whatever it is that you really want.